military pilot in training. Ahead lie years of hard work and an investment of millions of dollars.
Want to be in the military and flying for the military.
Enthusiastic student pilots, a nation that once trained 1,000 pilots a month. But today there are not enough trainees in the pipeline to replace pilots abandoning the military for commercial airlines.
Now I can say personally the grass is greener on the other side.
For the Canadian military, a crisis in the cockpit. Next. Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, the air base that provides all primary and advanced jet training for the Canadian Armed Forces. About 65 pilots will earn their wings at Moose Jaw this year. Training standards are among the highest in the world. One of the would-be pilots, Second Lieutenant Dave Pletz.
This has been the most frustrating yet challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done in my life.
Dave Pletz joined the military the day he left high school for Royal Military College. He has one ambition, to become a fighter pilot. Dave is in the advanced jet training program and hopes to get his wings in less than a month.
I'm keeping my goals simple and very short term, and that's to get wings. That's the reason that I'm here right now. I want to be in the military and flying for the military.
At this stage of his training, the military has invested $1 million in Dave, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. To produce a frontline F-18 pilot requires $13 million in aircraft operating costs alone. And experienced pilots are quitting in unprecedented numbers. For every fledgling pilot earning wings at Moose Jaw, 2 fully trained operational pilots are leaving the service for commercial airlines. There are not enough C-130 Hercules transport pilots left to mount an advanced tactical airlift. The operational posture of F-18 fighter squadrons is restricted. Training missions have been cut back for lack of pilots. There is as well a shortage of qualified instructors, and this in a nation that has a reputation for flight training that reaches back to the First World War. At stake, Canada's commitments to NATO and her ability to respond to requests from the United Nations. Crisis or no crisis, training standards are as high as ever.
The common saying is you're always 2 flights away from the end of your career. And I mean, it's a cold fact. It's just because the standards are so high, there's a training syllabus that must be met, and the levels must be met.
Tower, good morning. Braves, takeoff departure.
G Braves, good morning. Channel 5, when airborne.
Today for Dave Pletz, the last and toughest part of a student jet pilot's training, formation flying.
Once you actually get into the plane and start flying, everything, all the jitters and nervousness just gets thrown out the window because you've got to concentrate on the task at hand, obviously.
Nice and smooth. Come on, Dave, you can do this.
Only those with the right stuff survive pilot training. Learning to fly a military jet involves 100 hours in the Tutor, a nimble 2-seater. Each student works closely with the flight instructor who takes them through the training syllabus, measuring their progress through every stage. Students are in the air almost every day. Every flight is graded, and the day starts with an instructor asking students how to respond to an emergency.
You're in the traffic pattern, 3,400 feet, 240 knots, in formation, okay? Lead rolls in, 60-degree bank turn to turn downwind, and simulate emergency, you feel a loss of thrust. Dave, What are you
So
gonna
am I currently stepped up at this
do?
point?
Stepped up in the turn.
So, okay, first thing I want to do is avoid lead, so I'm going to roll wings level, zoom, air start, analyze, and as well give lead an RT call. Let them know two's out blind, engine failure. So that takes care of that.
Dave has the right answer, but he ran into problems with his formation flying test and did not pass.
Unfortunately, one of the checks didn't get verbalized, so that came up as a point. And because of them and the compounded number of smaller errors, it was deemed that it wasn't an acceptable flight. So I can't foresee everything. Like I said, sometimes you just miss something. You get so distracted sometimes.
Maybe we were in a little bit tight, so in order to space it out a little bit
This
more.
was Dave's first flying test failure. He'll get one more chance. If he fails again, he's out. Dave's instructor, Captain Chris Miller, says that in training military pilots, even small mistakes can't be tolerated.
Generally, with military flyers, I think that we push them and we try to develop those abilities really fast. And the guys that are able to adjust and adapt and develop the ability and the judgment required to do the job, the faster they do it, generally the better.
The weeding out process begins at one of the 32 Armed Forces recruitment offices in cities across the country.
Okay. All right, so those are the two primary aircrew trades for officers.
There is no shortage of candidates for flight training. About 3,000 a year apply. But many lack 20/20 vision. Others don't meet educational or medical standards. 700 applicants a year are sent to Canadian Forces-based Trenton to be tested by a cold-hearted machine. The process is called CAPS, the Canadian Automated Pilot Selection System. Major Cecil Lonis.
CAPS is a method of using a tester, not a simulator. It's a full-motion tester, and it evaluates the psychomotor abilities of potential candidates for the Canadian Forces Pilot Training Program.
No questions at all?
The test equipment is a computerized version of a pilot selection machine developed 50 years ago. The goal remains the same, to weed out the unsuitable before wasting money training them.
There is no subjective input from any selection officer or instructor or any outside influence.
Check climb rate.
It tells the candidate what's expected, it demonstrates what's expected, it lets the candidate perform the maneuver, and then the machine itself evaluates the maneuver, depending on how far the candidate varies from the norm.
Descending too fast.
4 one-hour sessions determine the candidate's success or failure.
Check airspeed. Check engine RPM.
About 15 candidates go through the process each week. 7 fail. 2 others fail a thorough medical examination.
We expect to save approximately 15% of our training budget by using CAPS because we can screen them out at an earlier stage. That way we're saving instructor time, we're saving fuel and wear and tear on actual airplanes.
In the end, of the 700 invited to Trenton, about 140 will make it to Portage La Prairie, Manitoba, and basic flying school. They'll spend about 35 hours in a Slingsby Firefly, a simple prop-driven monoplane. Once again, the relentless process of weeding out the unsuitable. On average, 15% of would-be pilots will not move on. Finally, about 120 will move on to basic jet training in Moose Jaw, and only 85 or 90 will survive 8 months flying the Tutor. At the end of this period of training, they'll be screened, some moving into helicopters or transports, others into the advanced jet training program.
Through the workbook here, there'll be another...
When they first arrive in Moose Jaw, they spend 6 weeks in ground school, learning how the Tutor works.
Okay, we'll let you work on that.
Jeanette Schroeder found ground school demanding.
It was a lot of work, like, you'd get back from school in the daytime and then right away into your studies, in the first little while, because the course load is pretty heavy.
Then come long hours in a Tutor simulator, learning to handle the jet's controls. So far, students haven't even seen the inside of a Tutor cockpit, so they're given a motivational flight. It's a free ride, the only one that doesn't get marked.
It was amazing. Like, first I walked out there and we're in operations and ops, and instructor says, Captain Kazera says, well, go get your parachute. And I'm like, oh yeah. So I walk in there and I check out my parachute and put it on, and I'm like, wow, I'm wearing a parachute, you know? And then walk out to the airplane with the instructor, and it's a lot bigger than it first seems. Like, you walk out there and you think, oh, you know, it's a nice sized jet, and you know, but you don't really realize it until you get up there, and then you get in the actual aircraft and you're sitting there, and as much as you've studied for it and everything, it's still pretty awe-inspiring in the fact that I'm going to be flying this. It was excellent.
Motivation for advanced jet students like Dave Pletz is watching F-18s in flight. 10 have flown in from their base at Cold Lake, Alberta.
There's always been the romance with the fighter aircraft. I'm young, single, and something that's always captivated me is high-performance jets. I'd really, really like to end up in Cold Lake.
A nail-biting day for Dave. Today he'll tackle his formation flying test for the second time, and his career rides on the outcome.
I know for myself, I learn from my mistakes. So I know that from what I've learned, I won't do it again. The law of intensity helps with that. But I know everything that has to be done. About 80% of flying is being mentally prepared for it and knowing what to expect. And the rest of it is hands and feet.
Hot dog's good, harness is good, correction pins out, and trim's good, tension's fine. Fuel 1,900 pounds, slaps that takeoff, and full control. Watch your legs there, sir. Pass brace, radar service, okay, 5 miles northeast, close to ring. Blaze, button 15, go.
Basically, we go out to the area and we do some what we call fighting wing, where we basically break close formation and follow one another around for a little bit.
Go get him, go get him, go get him, go get him.
And it's nice, it's maneuverable, and it teaches us how to keep spacing, and basically it gives us an idea of what it's like in a real tactical fighter world.
Not bad, don't lose him, keep going.
Dave moves up from wing position to lead, heading back to the field on instruments. Over the field, they swap positions. Dave follows the instructor into the landing pattern, down for a landing.
Come on, baby. There we go. Right on.
Dave Pletz had a perfect flight. He's made the grade and earned his wings. Another step closer to his dream of flying F-18s. Today, the tutor. Yesterday, it was the Harvard trainer, symbol of Canada's distinguished record of training the world's best pilots. Next. Graduation day at RMC, Royal Military College, in Kingston, Ontario. 180 cadets ending 4 years of study, the future officer corps for the Canadian Armed Forces. 1/3 of Canada's military pilots are graduates of RMC. Christine Salt is from a Navy family. Both her father and brother are naval officers. But Christine is hooked on flying.
I would love to fly jets. I've got a lot of goals. Getting jets, getting my wings is the first biggest one. And I think ultimately my career goal is to be a member of the snowbird team. I'll try my hardest, and I'm gonna aim for jets. But if I'm flying, that's when I'll be happy.
Christine will head for Moose Jaw and primary jet training. Once they pass through the Memorial Arch, 4 years as a lowly cadet at an end, they can cut loose.
I'm done!
Graduates of RMC have had 4 years of quality university education. In the past, Most of those who went on to train as pilots made a lifetime career of military service. Now all too many quit after the obligatory 7 years. Ellen English, professor of history at RMC and at Queen's University, has been asked to undertake a study of the pilot shortage.
Pilot shortages are, in fact, a cyclical event. You can go back to World War I and trace them right through till today, and you'll find that in peace or in war, it's rare that the number of pilots actually matches the need. They're usually not enough or too many. For example, up until 1916, there were more than enough pilots for the Royal Flying Corps. After the Battle of the Somme, there were terrible shortages. In 1918, the Royal Air Force was losing up to 32% casualties per month.
In 1917, the British Royal Flying Corps set up a training establishment in Ontario. Cost of training a pilot, $2,000. In the beginning, training methods were hit and miss, the results often catastrophic. At Camp Morgan, there were from 3 to 7 flying accidents a day. Canada's first training aircraft was the JN-4 Canuck, a modified American Curtiss JN-3. 1,200 were built in Canada for the Flying Corps program. Students were ready to go overseas after passing a rudimentary test.
The test itself was fairly simple. The students would climb up to about 500 feet, do a couple of figure of eights, land, take off again, and then land again with the engine switched off in the area about the size of a tennis court. And that was the sum total of the exam.
I used to stunt for him, you know.
Henry Botterill is Canada's last living World War I fighter pilot. At 102, his memory is fading. With the help of his 80-year-old logbook, he recalls how little flight training he was given.
Time flown under instructions, 7 hours. Time flown solo, 40 hours, 10 minutes.
Botterill was fortunate. Some pilots were told to solo after little more than 1 hour of dual instruction. And the Canuck trainer did little to prepare pilots for hot new aircraft like the Sopwith Camel. The Camel was Henry Botterill's favorite, even after a crash.
The engine cocked out. I was flying low near some wires. The engine conked out. I just about missed going into one of the little canals along the banks, you know, and I just caught it up enough to land, you know, reasonably well. Uppity, uppity, up, as they say.
By the time of the armistice, Canada had trained 3,000 pilots, including 10 squadrons of Americans. There were dramatic improvements in military aircraft in the 20s and 30s. To fly them meant longer and more complex training programs. Canada's RCAF required 16 weeks of elementary flight training at the outbreak of the Second World War. But pilot selection methods were unscientific, to say the least. The British RAF had a washout rate of 50%.
Roger Myers, the Canadian psychologist, went over and found that, in fact, the selection system that the RAF had was no better than flipping a coin. One night in the mess, after what he described as a serious bout of drinking, the group captain came over and confided in him that he had his own personal method of selecting. What he would do is he would watch the reaction of his pet dog to the applicant. And if the dog liked the lad, then he was in. And if he didn't, he was out. And the group captain justified this by saying, after all, dogs know a lot more about human behavior than human beings.
Canadian scientists set out to develop a rational selection process. Ways had to be found to predetermine those who would make successful pilots. The cost of training had climbed from $2,000 to $25,000.
One of the unique Canadian ways was the visual link trainer.
The link trainer was made by a company that built thrill rides for exhibitions and fairs. It became a pilot training aid, and in Canada formed the basis of a new pilot selection process.
Militaries usually allocate only a small amount of time, a fairly short period of time, for people to learn all the skills that are involved. And if you can't keep up with the program, as they say, then you're scrubbed.
Canada's vast and empty reaches, far removed from German bombers, would be utilized for Allied flight training. On a scale so enormous, U.S. President Roosevelt would label the country the aerodrome of democracy. Toronto writer and broadcaster Ted Barris wrote a book about the plan titled Behind the Glory.
When the war broke out in 1939, it came to Britain's doorstep very quickly, and it was quite clear that if Britain fell, so fell the Commonwealth and maybe the free world. So the need to defend Britain seemed to be the paramount need, and of course the greatest threat was from the air, from the Luftwaffe. And so everything pointed to putting this massive training plan, the heart of it, in Canada, and it came to tremendous fruition. Overnight, this country created 107 different training stations and 230-odd locations where training of some sort was going on.
At its peak in 1943, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan needed 120 airfields, 80 built from scratch. It was churning out 1,000 pilots a month and 2,000 navigators, bombardiers, air gunners, radio operators, and flight engineers. Trainees from all over the free world trained in thousands of Canadian-built aircraft.
They came from Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Rhodesia, South Africa. They came from the United States. We had 6,000 Americans in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan before the Americans even got into the war.
Winston Churchill took a long view of the air training plan. He ordered the best airmen be kept in Canada as instructors.
He said, no, don't send your instructors. Keep them there to build the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, which will eventually win the war.
Charlie Convalanca was one of the instructors held in Canada, allowed overseas to fight only near the war's end. He flew every training aircraft in use. Today, for the first time since the war, Charlie finds himself in the cockpit of the Harvard trainer.
I still think that this is the best training aircraft that was ever built. If you could fly it properly, you could fly anything.
The Harvard had many of the characteristics of the fighter aircraft pilots would fly overseas, Spitfires and Hurricanes. It required hands-on flying, yet it was safe and forgiving in the hands of a student pilot.
Harvard is a very stable aircraft. It is a precise aircraft. You have to fly precisely and properly, and if you do, the Harvard will repay you many times over by letting you have the hand, eye, and foot skills to manage a lot different airplanes.
Barris and Convalanca tour the Canadian War Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, where many of the wartime training aircraft are on display, including the Fleet Finch.
Very big role. This is where we really learned to fly. Did we have the coordination that would make a pilot? And we flew these things for anywhere between 45 and 50 hours.
Many of Canada's best young pilots, hoping to go overseas, instead found themselves spending the war years as instructors, teaching young pilots the ways of the Fleet Finch.
There's a myth about instructors that they were the worst airmen, that the best went overseas to fight. As the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan got up to speed, the top 10% of every graduating class was plowed back into the plan to become the next generation of instructors. These were the men who were performing the best who were kept here.
Charlie Convalanca was in the top 10%, so he spent most of the war far from the aerial battles over Europe, denied a chance to win distinction in air combat.
Well, it wasn't to be for a lot of us. I finally did get overseas, but I had to pay my dues in training command, and I'm glad. It was an important contribution.
Churchill called the BCATP perhaps the most decisive factor in winning the war. Why? because there would be this never-ending supply of qualified pilots, navigators, wireless radio operators, gunners, who, in the instance of one man being killed in an aircrew or several, could fit into those jobs like the perfect parts of a puzzle and carry on as if nothing had happened, with the Air Force not skipping a beat.
I don't think anybody will ever realize the magnitude of what it was that Canada did, because nobody else in the world thought we could do it. I don't know how widely known it is, but at the end of the war in Europe, we had the third largest Allied Air Force in the world. And for my book, it was the best.
In the 1950s, some of the old air bases were reopened. 4,000 pilots and navigators were trained under the NATO Air Training Plan. Some NATO countries had aircrew training in Canada until 1983. Now a new NATO Air Training Plan is in the works for Canada. A bold venture for a nation that doesn't have enough pilots to man its own aircraft. Canadian pilots have been training in the Tutor jet for over 30 years. It was designed by Canadair in the 1960s. Major Jeff Young, a former Snowbird pilot, is chief flying instructor at Moose Jaw. He says the Tutor is a very forgiving aircraft.
It's not what's called a fly-by-wire aircraft. It doesn't require any electrical impulses to make things happen. When a pilot is deflecting the control stick, he is actually deflecting the control surfaces. So it's extremely reliable in that regard. So every input that the pilot puts into the stick, he gets direct feedback immediately with the airframe itself.
The cockpit for this airplane is ideally suited for pilot training. It has the side-by-side seating so that the instructor and student get direct interaction with each other, and the instructor can make any kind of points that he wants to verbally through the intercom system of the aircraft, and he can also make it visually to the student as well. So it enhances the student's learning.
Forgiving it may be, but the Tutor's technology is obsolete. It does not prepare pilots for the dramatic step up to the F-18 fighter with its fly-by-wire controls and advanced avionics. They have to spend too much time training in the F-18 with its operating cost of almost $10,000 an hour. But new jet trainers are expensive.
It says, oh, I know where I'm pointing.
To Major Marty Tate fell the task of making Canada's flight training program more cost-effective.
Our number one requirement was not to reduce the quality of the pilot we were training, but rather to look at the business side of it and see if we could reduce the costs we were incurring in training a pilot. Well, what we learned is that the system we are currently operating was biased towards a fighter pilot graduate. And we didn't need to do that anymore because 2/3 of our pilots don't fly fighters. They go off and fly transporter helicopters. So we could modify the system, put in new airplanes, stream the multi-engine and helicopter pilots off sooner, and then have only the expensive airplanes for the very few people that would go and fly fighters.
The solution came from an unlikely source, private industry. A consortium led by Bombardier will buy and maintain new training aircraft and provide ground school courses. The Canadian military will provide flight instruction. The consortium will recover its costs by selling flight training to Canadian and other NATO pilots. In fact, to all comers.
It just so happened that NATO at that very moment was asking for nations to host their training program, which currently resides in Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. And we were able to put in an offer to host, and it was accepted. And so now the two programs, both Canada and the United States, are working hand in hand.
The NATO Flight Training Center, the NFTC, will take over the base at Moose Jaw and provide operational jet training at Cold Lake. A new primary trainer, the Harvard II turboprop, will replace the Slingsby Firefly.
For those enthusiasts out there, this is very similar to a World War II fighter, and it's going to have a myriad of cockpit systems on board. It's the avionics in this would put an airliner to shame, and the handling characteristics is there. It's quite a nimble little airplane. Its maximum speed is around 270 knots, and it can turn at about 7 G, and at those speeds to generate that kind of G, it's just a tiny little circle.
The Harvard II is a two-seater with a Pratt & Whitney engine that puts out 1,100 shaft horsepower. It has modern avionics systems and displays for an easier transition to jet training.
The cockpit is the finest cockpit I've ever sat in my life. It was a custom purpose-built cockpit. The displays and the arrangement of the instruments is just outstanding. The control harmony, the relationship between the stick and the rudder and the elevator, man, it is a thing of beauty. It is natural. Like, this is an airplane you put on and you actually wear it.
When student pilots are ready for the move to jets, they'll fly the Hawk 100 from British Aerospace, originally produced for the Royal Air Force. Today, there are 6 versions, and they're flown in 16 countries. They're not only superb training aircraft, some are fully armed jet fighters. The U.S. Navy uses a carrier version, the Goshawk, for training. The Bombardier-led consortium will buy 17 Hawk 100s for the NATO Flight Training Center. After flying the Hawk, student pilots will find it easy to move up to the F-18.
So, we're going to talk about the head-up display here.
Roger Searle is former chief test pilot for the Hawk program at British Aerospace. He's an Ottawa familiarizing military brass with the features of the new aircraft.
So in the Hawk, what we've tried to do is to bring the cockpit towards the technical capability of frontline aircraft by introducing a glass cockpit, computer-controlled displays, and the controls that a frontline pilot would see. Well, the Hawk, of course, being an advanced trainer like leading fighter trainer, has a flight envelope that's very similar to a subsonic frontline aeroplane, but its aerodynamic shapes are optimized for subsonic flight. So we have a flight envelope from a takeoff speed of, say, 120 knots all the way up to 575 knots at low level. In terms of G envelope, the aircraft can pull 8G, which is what happens in a combat maneuver. Students leaving the Hawk and going on to Eurofighter or F-18 are not going to be surprised by the rate, speed, acceleration, and G-forces they'll achieve. They'll be at home. Well, the Hawk 100 has a system based on a 1553 data bus. This is a specification for a data highway, which is widely used on most modern fighter aeroplanes. So sitting on this data highway, we have up to 32 different operational units. For example, the head-up display, weapons control unit. They're becoming less seat of the pants and more tactically aware aircraft commanders with a very great deal of data flowing into them from sources such as AWACS and from the ground and from their sensors on board. And they need to be taught to manage and understand and manipulate that data, and that's what the Hawk 100's glass cockpit is designed to do.
I think it's a wonderful training airplane. It's a very stable airplane, it's a very forgiving airplane. It's the first jet fighter class airplane I've ever been able to spin.
The NATO flying school is going to be a great thing for the Air Force. In reality, it's what the Air Force needs. I'm looking forward to it immensely because it's going to be like getting that brand new vehicle and climbing in. It's going to smell like a new car sort of thing. And there's going to be a lot of these young kids that are going through pilot training today that could be the forerunners of that whole NATO program. So they've got that to look forward to.
A new aircraft is state-of-the-art training program. The military will be able to train its pilots, but will it be able to keep them? The irresistible urge to become a civilian pilot. Next. The extraordinary growth of the airline industry is draining pilots from the military in almost all Western nations, and Canada is no exception. Major Canadian carriers say they'll need another 2,000 pilots over the next 5 years. In 1997, carriers in the U.S. took on 12,000 new pilots. And apart from the industry's growth, an entire generation of airline pilots is at retirement age. 14,000 American pilots went on pension last year. Everywhere, military pilots are in demand. Jamie Watson is a Canadian military pilot who listened to the siren song of the airlines. 4 years ago, Watson shared his adventures as a Hercules pilot on an episode of Flightpath. He flew 350 missions into Bosnia, was in the Gulf War, saw action in Somalia and Rwanda.
I did Rwanda during the crisis there. At one point, there was bounties out on the aircrew lives. So if you happen to go down or whatever, there was bounties on your body parts. It wasn't just your life. So there was, you're always dealing with things like that going through your mind.
A few months later, Jamie Watson was under fire in Sarajevo.
In Bosnia, it's a little more of a controlled environment at the airport, but going in and out of Bosnia, we had a corridor, but throughout that corridor, there's always small arms fire. One time I had was an anti-tank grenade. A couple of them shot at us while just after airborne. We maneuvered for it. We didn't know what it was at that time. You maneuver for the worst case. And that time we maneuvered, got back down low level, and left Sarajevo and unharmed. Continued flying in the next day. Yeah, I've seen a few things, I guess.
Watson liked frontline excitement, but he began thinking about what he was missing during those long missions overseas.
You start seeing your lifestyle being totally manipulated by the military. You go away for 6 weeks, come back for 2, you go away again for 5 weeks, and you try to get certain days off, and all of a sudden you'd be away for that 6 weeks, and you'd miss out on important things. So you'd like, oh well, life goes on. Well, you come to a point where you say, well, I'm tired of missing out on life, and then you start thinking, well, if I get out, my lifestyle can improve.
Armed forces pilots don't fly forever. Sooner or later, they're stuck behind a desk.
I wasn't necessarily going to be guaranteed to fly all my life. at a certain point in the military, as a pilot, you're supposed to go and help out, managing at a desk. Well, I wasn't, looking forward to that, so I wanted to keep flying.
Confronted with spending 2 years at a desk job, Jamie Watson quit.
See, where are you going?
Combat takeoffs and dodging ground fire are in Watson's past now, but he finds the Air Canada Pilots Lounge full of familiar faces.
And I came as soon as they opened up the doors.
Well, there's somebody else in the hold with...
everybody that was there is here.
Yeah, because I met another guy.
AJ Salmon, Bill Carswell.
At times, the Air Canada Operations Room is like an Air Force reunion. Jamie thinks many more military pilots are just waiting until their time's up to get out.
Well, in my opinion, yes. The majority of them are, they're looking, they wait, and as soon as it's there, they're going to take the break.
In Britain, the RAF now guarantees pilots a lifetime of flying. In return, they must accept limited promotion in rank. Canada's Air Force is just too small for that kind of flexibility.
Well, right now I fly the Airbus 320, first officer at Air Canada. It's a totally different type of flying, too. Flying an airline, your goal is, passenger safety and the service. That's what we do.
There's another big difference in airline flying. In time, a pilot can make more money. In the military, with senior rank, a pilot's top pay reaches about $75,000. A senior 747 pilot for an airline can earn over $200,000. Canada's military has offered senior pilots who have put in their time up to $75,000, a bonus to sign up for 5 more years. But money isn't everything. For Jamie, the big attraction of civilian life is an improvement in lifestyle.
But I totally orientate myself around what I can, do for fun, on my days off. At least I know which days I get off, so I can play hockey on Monday nights, or I do a lot of mountain biking, so I can go do these things and not worry about someone calling me and saying, well, we really need you today. You're the only person that can do it. And my wife, of course, enjoys that much better because now she knows at least if I'm going to show up to a party. She knows yes or no, he'll be here. It works out a lot better.
He's changed a lot since the military. We used to call him a really black and white person, and now he's got a few colors. And we're going to work on some more.
Yeah, what do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Janine has a chiropractic practice in Toronto. If Jamie had stayed in the military, she would have faced constant postings and the need to rebuild her practice with every move. Even worse, most of Canada's air bases are in small, isolated communities.
No, I don't think I'd be a good military wife because I'm a city girl, and that's a big thing. I like the conveniences of a large city and what it offers. I also think being in the military, I would have to be always working around his schedule, and that was the one thing that I always did do. The minute Jamie came into town, I dropped everything for him, so that's including my schooling, in order to have that little bit of time together with him, which was worth it. But I don't see I could possibly do that my whole life.
Jamie still loves the Hercules that he flew to countries around the world. So he joined the reserves just to get his hands on a Herc's controls.
I went up and offered my services on flying the Herc, and the reserves were happy to have me. I work at 429 Squadron because they're definitely short on experience in this area. Cabin lighting, jump lighting, be full bright. Cabin heat control, go neutral on the way up and then full cold as you open the doors. Today we're doing military free fall parachuting, which is where the jumpers jump out around 10,000 feet with steerable chutes, and they're using test chutes today, so we'll be doing about 6 lifts of up and downs for the jumpers.
Hey, ground by the 25 at the hole, switching tower.
I just enjoy flying the Herc. That's why I'm in the reserves. I give me my airline job, doesn't give me that kind of adrenaline rush, but this definitely gives me the adrenaline that I like to feel every once in a while.
525, roger, on the climb up for the drop, you can contact.
Jamie Watson is an experienced tactical pilot, and they're in short supply. There's a 40% shortfall of Herc captains capable of providing training in advanced tactics.
And 20 and 10-minute warnings.
If we had to go to deploy for something severe, we'd definitely be short airlift capability. If we had to actually go in and do the same type of thing like Sarajevo or Rwanda right now, we couldn't hold a deployment doing that, I'd say, for more than 3 weeks to a month.
Be close. Yeah, we're getting there. Just about to call it. 15 seconds. 5 seconds. Green on. All clear, 10 jumpers away. Green on.
A parachute drop executed with care and precision. As good as reservists like Jamie are, they're no solution to Canada's military pilot shortage. Historian Alan English.
I think what we need to do is look at it in terms of perhaps its over the last 50 years or so, and try and devise solutions that are going to be long-term and not just Band-Aid solutions like bonuses when we're short. It seems to be the way we do things in Canada, though. We never invest anything in the military if we can get away with it, and then when the crisis comes, we throw money at it and hope that'll solve the problem. We've been lucky in the past. Let's hope we're lucky in the future.
Major Marty Tate believes the future lies with the NATO Training Center.
One of the salvation entities at the end of the rope for the senior officers is the NFTC program, because there's the potential to expand the program to meet the needs.
Unwilling to sacrifice its high standards, the Air Force could only hang on, awaiting the day when it could once again fill the training pipeline.
The Air Force is elected to bite the bullet, wait until NFTC comes on board, and populate NFTC with quality people so that we can keep our high standards in our training program and we can get the volume that we require. NFTC is the salvation for this.
I think it's an excellent deal in the sense that it allows us to maintain an infrastructure that we couldn't afford to maintain otherwise. So it appears to be a win-win situation for everyone.
It's too late to bring back the Jamie Watsons. Their time in the service is only a fond memory.
I mean, I enjoyed my time in the military, and I just like some of how it's run, but I can't just say I just like the flying, because it's the best flying, I've ever done.